Welcome to this third session of our second block dealing with the management of urban infrastructure systems. In this third session, we want to talk about the different dimensions, the five main dimensions that one has to look at. Those we have already talked about the dimensions in the first block, but here we talk about the implications that these dimensions have, the technical, the economic, the environmental, the social, and the jurisdictional dimensions, the implications of them on the management of urban infrastructure systems. Now let's start with the technical dimensions. And here we have four important things plus another one. So first, there is the question of interconnection between the different infrastructures in the same or across jurisdiction. Let's take the example of water or wastewater pipes. These pipes have to be connected and you have to manage these interconnections. They may have been built at different types at different moments in history, some out of metal and some out of plastic, and you have questions of interconnection of the pipes. Then you have questions of interoperability. Here, I think the transport is a very good example. You are operating buses across different jurisdictions. So the platform where the bus is going to discharge the passengers are different in the different cities that you are operating in, even though they are part of the same agglomeration. You, as a manager, technically, you have to manage that interoperability and adjust that. Or you may use different electricity systems in different locomotives running on different tracks. The third big challenge is the capacity. Infrastructures have always limited capacity. There are only so many cars that you can put on the road, so many metro rams that you can put on a metro track, so many trams, so much water that you can put through the pipe, and there are capacity crunches, and you as an infrastructure manager have to deal with these crunches. And then there is the system. Overall, we're talking about an urban infrastructure system. So energy is an entire system across the whole agglomeration or across the whole metropolitan area. And if you have a blackout in one end, you have to make sure that it doesn't extend to the rest of the system. You have a pollution in the water system in one part, and you want to make sure that the rest of the system functions. So it's really to consider the entirety of the system that is important. And the fifth element here, technically, is of course the interfaces. So it's not just each infrastructure in itself that has to be technically managed, interconnection, interoperability. It's also the interfaces between the different infrastructures. We all know that transport, that telecommunications is using energy. And so if the interface does not work well, you may not have electricity to run the urban train, or you may not have electricity to run the urban communications tower. So all the interfaces among the urban infrastructure systems are extremely important from a technical point of view. From an economic point of view, we have equally important things to consider as managers. Of course, you want to manage in the economically most efficient way. And this is, of course, a purely, it's a rational economic behavior. You don't want to have waste in energy, waste in water. We know that water leakages are very, very big, amounting to 30, 40, 50, sometimes 70% of the water is leaked in water pipes. This is economically inefficient. It's a technical problem, but it's economically inefficient. Second element to consider, of course, is the profitability. We have already talked about that. I mean, you want to make sure that the infrastructure services that you are providing are ultimately profitable, so that you can develop in further services, that you can innovate, things like that. So, I mean, think about a taxi system or a waste management system. You want to make sure that the waste you are treating is generating some sort of profit, so that you can invest into new technologies to better treat your waste. You receive subsidies. We have seen that in some cases, some urban services, public services, receive subsidies. Typically at transport, there are a lot of subsidies, sometimes even in water. And as a manager of urban infrastructure services, you want to make sure that these subsidies are used in the most efficient way possible, because we will see this later, you are accountable. Let's talk about the environmental dimension now. Now, environment, we have already said, is a very important dimension in urban systems. Cities are the big polluters of the world, and if you can actually make improvements in environmental aspects of your urban infrastructures, you can have a big impact on overall pollution. So here, let's say, the overall goal must, of course, be to operate your infrastructures, to manage your infrastructures in the least polluting way possible. This means clean buses. This means energy generated from renewables, things like that. Whenever possible, given a certain state of technology, you want to make sure, and given the finances, of course, at hand, you want to make sure that you have paid attention to the pollution that your infrastructures are generating. Overall, I think you want to have minimal environmental impact when you build roads, when you tear down houses for metro tracks or urban mass transit tracks. The goal should always be to have a minimum environmental impact. Ideally, you would want to have a zero environmental footprint, zero waste, zero pollution, zero greenhouse gas emissions, something that we call urban metabolism, where everything is totally recycled. The waste is burned to create distance heating and reused and things like that. Least heavy metal pollution, things like that. But of course, this is very much dependent on the state of technology, which itself is dependent, of course, on the finances that you can mobilize to buy that kind of technology. We have seen several things already. We have seen the stakeholders, the users and the citizens are particularly sensitive to equity. And you know, you should provide urban infrastructure services in equitable ways. All the people should have access to drinking water, not just the rich people or the ones that live in some parts of the city or others. The same access to transport or things like that. There is the whole question of affordability. This is the question actually that relates, I mean, for some urban inhabitants, you know, a bus ticket is highly affordable because they have big income. For other ones, I know cases where workers pay almost half of their salary simply to get to work from one end of the city to the other. That means it is not affordable. So affordability is not an absolute term. It's not the price of the ticket. It's the price relative to the money that these people have at their disposal to use the infrastructure services. That's a social dimension that managers have to pay attention to. And then, of course, there is the whole question of discrimination. I mean, it is easy to put a landfill in the area where poor people are, where they cannot actually protest. It is easy to build a highway through parts of the city where the people are disorganized. It is more difficult to put a highway through a gated community, for example. So this equitable, non-discriminating approach to urban infrastructure development is a particularly important dimension that managers have to pay attention to. Now let's come finally to the jurisdictional dimension. And we have already talked about it. The fact that infrastructures often operate across different jurisdictions, they are developed across different jurisdictions. This is a political challenge because you deal with different political authorities, but it is also a legal challenge because you deal with different legal systems. There is also the issue of transparency because you're operating in different jurisdictions. You have to show how you are operating. You have to show your costs. You have to show the way that the things are run in the different jurisdictions, building and operating the things. Water, bus, taxi concessions. You have to be transparent. And ultimately, you are accountable. Often you are accountable to different authorities, even though you operate in another authority. You are accountable to customers, you are accountable to investors, and you have to fulfill the contract. And this doesn't really matter whether you are a public operator or a private operator. In conclusion, we have looked at the 5 main dimensions that impact the management of urban infrastructure systems. Those are all dimensions managers have to pay attention to. In the next session, we will talk about the main schools of thought for managing the large urban infrastructure systems. Stay tuned.